There is a version of Stoicism that sounds beautiful when you first hear it, clean and elegant like a marble statue standing untouched by time, promising calm in chaos and strength in silence. And it attracts comfortable minds the way warm light attracts people who are tired of feeling too much. It whispers that suffering is optional, that pain is just a judgment, that if you master your thoughts, you will master life itself. And for a while that idea feels intoxicating, almost merciful, because it suggests you can rise above the mess without ever getting your hands dirty. But buried beneath that polished surface is a brutal truth that rarely gets spoken aloud because it threatens the very comfort that modern Stoicism has become so good at protecting. The truth is that Stoicism was never meant to make you comfortable, and the moment it starts doing that, it stops working and quietly turns against you. Imagine Marcus Aurelius not as a quote on an Instagram post, but as a man waking up before dawn in a freezing military tent, knowing that plague is tearing through his empire, that betrayal is circling his throne, and that the people he loves are dying one by one despite his discipline, his intellect and his virtue. His meditations were not affirmations meant to soothe his anxiety. They were desperate reminders written to himself so he wouldn't collapse under the weight of reality. Stoicism, in its raw form, was forged in discomfort, in constant confrontation with fear, loss, and moral failure, not as a shield to avoid pain, but as a framework to endure it without lying to yourself. Comfortable minds forget this, or maybe they never learn it at all, because discomfort is exactly what they are trying to escape. The brutal truth Stoicism hides from comfortable minds is that it demands far more from you than emotional detachment. It demands accountability so sharp, it feels like standing naked in front of your own conscience, stripped of excuses, stripped of self-pity, stripped of the stories you tell yourself to sleep at night. It does not tell you to stop feeling pain. It tells you to stop using pain as an identity. And that distinction matters, because pain acknowledged becomes a teacher, while pain suppressed becomes a poison that seeps into everything you touch. Modern interpretations often turn Stoicism into a kind of emotional anesthesia, a way to say it doesn't matter whenever something hurts too deeply. But the ancient Stoics would have called that cowardice, not wisdom. They believed in feeling the full weight of life while refusing to be ruled by it, which is a far more difficult path than pretending nothing affects you. A comfortable mind hears. Focus on what you can control and uses it to disengage from responsibility, to withdraw from relationships, to avoid hard conversations, to justify emotional distance as strength. But true Stoicism makes withdrawal impossible because it constantly asks what kind of person you are becoming through your actions, not just how calm you appear on the surface. There is a quiet violence in misused Stoicism, a violence that happens inwardly, where emotions are not processed but dismissed, where grief is labeled irrational, where anger is swallowed instead of understood, and where vulnerability is seen as weakness rather than information. Over time, this creates a hollow version of resilience that looks impressive until real pressure is applied, and then it cracks in unexpected ways. People who pride themselves on being unbothered often find themselves disconnected, numb, or inexplicably bitter. Because unexpressed emotion does not disappear, it waits. And it waits patiently for a moment when you are too tired to keep pretending. The Stoics knew this danger intimately, which is why they spoke so often about daily reflection, about examining your failures with honesty rather than denial, about recognizing your emotional reactions without becoming enslaved by them. They did not advocate for emotional blindness. They advocated for emotional literacy paired with moral courage. Comfortable minds, however, prefer slogans to discipline, shortcuts to self-examination, and certainty to humility, and so Stoicism becomes a costume they wear, rather than a practice that reshapes them from the inside out. Another brutal truth that hides behind the calm language of Stoicism is that it does not promise happiness, at least not in the way modern culture defines it. It promises integrity, clarity, and inner alignment, which often come at the cost of comfort. popularity, and ease. To live stoically is to accept that doing the right thing may isolate you, exhaust you, or break your heart, and that you are still obligated to do it anyway. This is not a philosophy for people who want life to feel good all the time. It is a philosophy for people who want to remain honorable when life feels unbearable. Comfortable minds like the idea of acceptance, but they confuse it with passivity. Stoic acceptance is not surrender to circumstances. It is the refusal to waste energy raging against reality while still acting decisively within it. It means acknowledging that you cannot control the storm, but you are still responsible for how you steer the ship, even when your arms are shaking and the waves are higher than you ever imagined. That kind of responsibility is heavy, and it does not flatter the ego, which is why so many people prefer a softened version of Stoicism that tells them to let go without asking what they are holding on to out of fear. There is also a darker truth that rarely gets mentioned. Stoicism will not save you from your unresolved wounds. If anything, it will expose them. When you strip away external blame and emotional indulgence, you are left face to face with patterns you've spent years avoiding, habits you've rationalized, and values you've compromised in small, quiet ways. For someone seeking comfort, this confrontation feels like punishment, but for someone seeking growth, it becomes a turning point. Stoicism is not a refuge from psychological work. It is an amplifier that makes avoidance impossible to sustain. Think about how often people quote Stoic ideas to justify staying in situations that erode them, telling themselves they are being virtuous by enduring what they should actually confront or leave. The ancient Stoics were not advocates of silent suffering for its own sake. They were advocates of rational action guided by virtue. Endurance without purpose is not Stoicism, it is resignation, and resignation slowly teaches you to accept less than you deserve while convincing yourself that you are enlightened for doing so. The philosophy also hides an uncomfortable truth about privilege and circumstance, one that comfortable minds prefer not to examine too closely. It is easier to preach indifference to external conditions when your basic needs are met, when your safety is not constantly threatened, when your voice is already heard. The Stoics acknowledged fortune and misfortune as realities of life, not excuses. But they also lived in a world where survival itself demanded resilience. When Stoicism is stripped of that context and sold as a universal solution, it risks becoming a tool that invalidates suffering rather than helping people navigate it with dignity. Yet despite all of this, Stoicism endures not because it makes life easier, but because it makes life clearer. When practiced honestly, it sharpens your perception of what matters and what does not by numbing your emotions, but by anchoring them to values that outlast momentary comfort. It teaches you to sit with discomfort long enough to learn from it, to act with courage even when fear is present, and to measure success not by how good you feel, but by how faithfully you live according to your principles. The brutal truth, then, is not that Stoicism is cold or inhuman, but that it is uncompromisingly human. It refuses to lie to you about the cost of integrity, the inevitability of loss, or the responsibility you carry for your own character. Comfortable minds want philosophy to be a pillow, something soft to rest on when life feels hard. But Stoicism is more like a mirror, and mirrors do not care whether you like what you see. They only show you what is there, and then leave you alone with the choice of what to do next. When you strip away the aesthetics, the quotes, the curated calm, you are left with a practice that asks you, again and again, whether you are willing to trade comfort for clarity, approval for honesty, and ease for meaning. That question is not gentle, and it was never meant to be. It echoes in moments of temptation, in moments of fear, in moments when no one is watching and you could easily choose the softer path. Stoicism does not shout its demands. It whispers them quietly, persistently, until you either listen or look away. And perhaps that is why the most dangerous misunderstanding of Stoicism is the belief that it will protect you from pain. It will not. What it offers instead is something far more challenging and far more valuable. The ability to walk through pain without losing yourself, without becoming cruel, without becoming small. That ability cannot be downloaded or quoted into existence. It must be earned through daily, often uncomfortable practice, through honest self-examination, and through the willingness to feel deeply without being ruled by what you feel. For comfortable minds, this realization can feel like a betrayal, as if the philosophy promised peace and delivered responsibility instead. But for those willing to see it clearly, it becomes an invitation not to detach from life, but to engage with it more fully, more courageously, and more truthfully than they ever have before. Stoicism, in its truest form, does not hide from brutality. It stands inside it, steady and unflinching, asking not how to escape, but how to remain worthy while enduring. Stoicism continues from that unflinching place, the place where comfort has already fallen away, and you are left with nothing but yourself and the weight of your choices. And this is where most people quietly step back. Because the philosophy no longer feels like a refuge, it feels like a demand. It asks what you will do when discipline no longer feels empowering, when restraint feels lonely, and when virtue brings no applause. In those moments, Stoicism stops being an idea and becomes a test of character, because the world does not slow down to reward your inner calm, and pain does not pause to admire your self-control. It simply keeps moving, indifferent to your ideals, forcing you to decide whether those ideals are real or just something you repeat when life is easy. The comfortable mind often wants Stoicism to function like armor, something that blocks feeling entirely. But true Stoicism functions more like exposed skin, sensitive to reality, aware of every shift in temperature, every wound, every subtle change in the environment. The difference is that this sensitivity is paired with restraint, not repression, with awareness rather than avoidance. You feel the sting of betrayal, the ache of failure, the grief of loss. And instead of hardening into bitterness or dissolving into despair, you ask what response aligns with who you choose to be. That question sounds simple, but in practice it is brutal, because it removes the luxury of impulsive relief and replaces it with the burden of conscious action. There is a quiet courage required to sit with emotion without rushing to numb it or explain it away. Stoicism demands that courage daily. It asks you to observe your anger without turning it into cruelty, to feel your sadness without turning it into self-pity, to acknowledge your fear without letting it dictate your behavior. Comfortable minds often mistake emotional intensity for emotional truth, believing that whatever feels strongest must be acted upon. But Stoicism teaches a more unsettling lesson, that your emotions are real, but they are not rulers. Accepting that means accepting that you will sometimes feel deeply and still choose a path that offers no immediate relief. This is where the philosophy begins to feel isolating, because the world often rewards the opposite. It rewards outrage over reflection, indulgence over restraint, visibility over virtue. To live stoically is to accept that you may be misunderstood, labeled cold, or accused of detachment, when in reality you are simply refusing to perform your inner life for validation. That misunderstanding can cut deeply, especially when it comes from people you care about. But Stoicism does not offer the comfort of being seen correctly by others. It offers the steadier, heavier comfort of seeing yourself clearly. Another truth rarely spoken is that Stoicism will not make you feel powerful in the way modern culture glorifies power. It will not inflate your ego or feed your sense of superiority. In fact, it has a way of humbling you relentlessly, because it forces you to confront how often your suffering is self-inflicted through expectation, attachment, and avoidance. It reveals how much energy you waste trying to control outcomes, instead of shaping your character, and that realization can be painful, because it strips away the narrative that you are a victim of circumstances alone. The Stoics believed that freedom comes from alignment between thought, action, and value, not from external dominance or emotional invulnerability. That kind of freedom is quiet and often invisible, which makes it unsatisfying for those who crave recognition. Comfortable minds want Stoicism to make them feel superior to chaos. But true Stoicism makes you intimate with it. aware that chaos is not an enemy to be conquered, but a condition of existence to be navigated with integrity. As you move deeper into the philosophy, another uncomfortable realization emerges. Stoicism does not absolve you from compassion. In fact, it demands it. The idea that Stoicism promotes emotional distance from others is a misunderstanding, born from fear of vulnerability. The Stoics emphasized our shared humanity, the interconnectedness of rational beings, and the moral obligation to act for the common good. To live stoically is to care deeply while accepting that you cannot control how others respond to that care. That balance is excruciating at times because it asks you to love without clinging and to serve without expectation. Comfortable minds often use Stoicism to justify withdrawal, convincing themselves that detachment is wisdom when it is sometimes just avoidance wearing philosophical clothing. True Stoicism does not encourage you to close your heart. It asks you to strengthen it so it can remain open without breaking. That strength is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It shows up in patience when you are exhausted, in fairness when you are angry, in kindness when no one would blame you for being harsh. There is also the matter of time, another source of discomfort that Stoicism refuses to soften. The philosophy confronts impermanence directly, not as a poetic concept but as an ever-present reality. Everything you love is temporary, including you. Comfortable minds like to acknowledge this in theory, but Stoicism asks you to live as if you truly understand it, to let the awareness of mortality sharpen your priorities rather than paralyze you with dread. This awareness does not make life lighter, it makes it heavier with meaning. When you accept that time is limited, excuses lose their power. Procrastination reveals itself as fear. Resentment becomes an expensive indulgence. Pettiness feels obscene in the face of finitude. Stoicism uses the certainty of death not to depress you, but to strip away illusions about what is worth your attention. That stripping process can feel violent to a mind accustomed to comfort because it leaves little room for distraction or denial. And still, Stoicism does not promise relief from the loneliness that sometimes accompanies clarity. Seeing the world as it is, without the filters of entitlement or fantasy, can create a sense of separation from those who prefer comforting illusions. The Stoics accepted this cost quietly, understanding that integrity often leads to solitude, at least temporarily. But they did not glorify isolation. They saw it as a byproduct of honesty, not a virtue in itself. Perhaps the most brutal truth of all is that Stoicism offers no finish line. There is no moment where you arrive and remain permanently calm, wise, or unshakable. The work is continuous, imperfect, and often invisible. You will fail. You will react poorly. You will betray your own ideals in small ways, and sometimes in large ones. Stoicism does not condemn you for this, but it does not comfort you with excuses either. It asks you to return again and again to the practice of noticing, correcting, and recommitting. For comfortable minds, this endless return feels exhausting, even unfair. They want transformation to be dramatic and permanent, not subtle and ongoing. But Stoicism understands something modern culture often forgets. That character is not built through grand gestures, but through repeated, often boring choices made under pressure. That kind of growth does not trend well. It does not sell easily. It happens quietly, inside moments no one else sees. And yet there is a strange, understated peace that emerges from this relentless honesty. Not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of alignment. When your actions begin to reflect your values more consistently, when you stop demanding that life feel fair before you act fairly, something steadies inside you. It is not happiness in the conventional sense, but a groundedness that persists even when circumstances are harsh. Stoicism, stripped of comfort, reveals itself not as a philosophy of emotional suppression, but as a discipline of presence. It teaches you to stand where you are, fully awake to reality, neither clinging to pleasure nor fleeing pain, and to choose your response with intention. That discipline does not remove suffering, but it prevents suffering from turning you into someone you do not respect. In the end, the brutal truth Stoicism hides from comfortable minds is that it will not protect your comfort, your identity, or your illusions. It will ask you to let them burn away if they stand between you and integrity. What it offers in return is not ease, but something rarer and harder to articulate, the ability to live without being at war with yourself. Even when life itself feels like a battlefield, that is not a promise made to everyone. It is an invitation extended only to those willing to trade the softness of comfort for the solidity of character and to discover, slowly and sometimes painfully, that the calm Stoicism offers is not the calm of numbness, but the calm of having nothing left to hide from yourself.